that 2014 season and bringing in Lane Kiffin, it was sort of like the beginning of a second dynasty that would happen, and arguably the second one was more powerful and more difficult to stop than the first one was.
Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. So today we're going to try something a little new. We're looking back, as we often do, which is always fun for us because there's a lot of history to sort of like celebrate, put under the microscope. But, you know, we're going to zero in on pieces of Alabama football history that we feel deserve another look under the magnifying glass, right? Like, we're bringing you the top 15, what we think are the top 15 best games of the 21st century. And we're going to count down from 15. We're going to go game by game and just talk it out. Celebrate what we loved about these games, the most memorable moments and plays, the players that made it all happen, what it all meant to those respective seasons and the big picture, why these games are still in our minds, in some cases 25 years later. Helping me to do that is our friend and Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalisi. Matt, did I get that right? Like, what are we looking to do with this series? Why might fans want to follow along here?
You know, Ben, in the days of Alabama football fandom, before we were always perpetually looking forward to next year, we did a lot of looking back. And there was once upon a time a culture of rewatching games that you had on tape, right? That was a thing people used to do. And it's crazy to think about, but that's what we would do sometimes. Not sped up supercut highlights, the whole game on tape. You'd have to fast forward through the commercial breaks. But you know, like I think still to this day, people like rewatching some of these classic games, these older games from whether you're watching it on YouTube or, I mean, one thing that I see a lot, and I'm a guy that uses, you know, TikTok and these newer platforms, but like even on there, I constantly get clips of individual plays or even whole games really like chopped up quickly of some of these classic games. I think it's just a thing that sports fans have always enjoyed, is like reliving those great games and those great moments. And it was honestly for the episode we're doing today, it was fun for me to go back and watch this whole game because I have a lot of thoughts and memories about this game, but like I think there's a lot of stuff that I didn't remember happened in this game.
Yeah, you lose the details, right? Like, you'll remember big plays. You may even remember like the context of the game, what was happening before, what was happening after, the impact that it had on the overall season. But, you know, Alabama fans have long been accused of living in the past, you know, especially before the Saban era, which was a fair criticism, but they had, again, a lot to celebrate, and then they just got to live through another golden age. So you can bet on people like us and so many Alabama fans continuing to live in the past, because there's just a lot to relish over the last many years. And
there's a lot of good past, to be fair to us.
You would too, believe me. Like, if you were in the same position, you would be living in the past too.
Yeah.
So there are just multiple pasts to live in at this point for Alabama fans. So it's been good for a long time. It's like, you know, what people would say, like, after the draft, like, they can't keep getting away with this, right? But Alabama has been getting away with this for many years. And, you know, this is just one of many amazing games that we're gonna live through, relive, and help you relive and reminisce over. But, you know, it's interesting, Matt. We're counting down from 15, and the first game on our list here is the 2014 game at LSU. It was in Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge. This game was played on what was it? What was the exact date, Matt? I want to get that right. November 9th, 2014. Okay, so November 9th, 2014. It was in Tiger Stadium, like I said, Death Valley in Baton Rouge. Hostile environment. Matt, you and I have both been there. We've been there for an Alabama LSU game. Alabama won the game 2013 in overtime. You'll remember that. fans. The 2014 season is interesting, Matt. I think about it a lot, actually. It's one of my weirdly one of my favorite seasons for a lot of different reasons. Nick Saban and Alabama, they're coming off of the kick six ending to the 2013 season when they had a chance to three-peat, obviously lose at Auburn. They go and they lose the Sugar Bowl to Oklahoma. And then after that, they lose A.J. McCarron, their multinational championship winning starting quarterback. There's a highly publicized quarterback battle between fifth-year senior Blake Sims and Florida State transfer Jake Coker. Sims wins the job ultimately. And in one of the biggest offseason moves and hires of Nick Saban's career, he brings in Lane Kiffin as offensive coordinator. And, Alabama 7-1 coming into the game. They lost a close one to Ole Miss, at Ole Miss, sloppy game in Oxford. I was there for that one too. They barely beat Arkansas in a rainy condition game the next week. They smash Texas A&M 59-0 in Tuscaloosa after that, and then they beat Tennessee by 2 touchdowns before they get a bye and go to Baton Rouge. Matt, what do you remember about this season or the start to this season, maybe the off season leading up to it?
I think there was a lot of uncertainty for sure. And I think that, I mean, for a lot of different reasons. Number one, it's hard to remember the 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 sort of nuances of our confidence and our certainty in what Nick Saban was accomplishing. At this point, he had already won 3 national championships, which is incredible. And I still think, okay, and mainly I'm remembering, coming off of that Notre Dame national championship. I remember the conversation being, okay, well, there's no question that this is the dynasty of its time. This is a dominant football program. Um, and no matter what happens from here, they have accomplished what they set out to do beyond their wildest dreams. But I don't think there was a sense of how much longer this would go, what directions it would take. And in fact, after 2013, there was even some discussion, some rumblings about whether the game had moved on past past Nick Saban, whether he could continue to stay on top the way that he had this run just been a case of a guy who was perfectly suited for the game at that time, and he dominated it, and then the game changed, and that meant his time on top was over. And, I think that I'm sure a lot of Alabama fans were saying that's not true. He'll figure it out. But I think there were some doubts. I think there were some nagging concerns as to whether that was the case after 2013. And, you've got Gus Malzahn and Hugh Freeze and kind of these hurry up, no huddle gurus that were starting to take the game by storm. Nick Saban is talking about how we need to change the rules to prevent some of this stuff from happening. That certainly seemed to be an indicator that maybe he was uncomfortable with the way the game was moving. And, honestly, hiring Lane Kiffin as an offensive coordinator is one of the most shocking things that Nick Saban ever did. I couldn't believe it at the time. I was so shocked at the decision, and it was a bizarre, almost out of character thing for Nick Saban to do. So there were a lot of things about the 2014 season that felt out of the comfort zone of what we had known of Nick Saban in the years leading up to that.
Yeah, it was wild. Nobody could have predicted that Lane Kiffin would ever be part of Alabama football or Nick Saban's dynasty or coaching tree. And it was just such a swerve. It was such a twist in the sort of like modern tale of Alabama football that this guy who had the reputation as a West Coast guy, USC guy, obviously had a lot of success out there. I don't have to go through the Lane Kiffin resume, but he also had the little chapter of being the Tennessee head coach and being on the opposite end of the Terrence Cody block. So he was part of the Saban story, at least for a little while. And again, he just kind of had this reputation as somebody that didn't really fit within the culture, or at least people's idea of what Alabama football was. And he comes in there and he just rocks the boat, and they make a much better team than I think people realized. We had those stories of Lane Kiffin is in Tuscaloosa. He's visiting the program. And there happened to be an opening in the offensive coordinator position when Doug Nussmeier had left after the 2013 season. And so it was just like, wow, is this really going to happen? Like, I mean, on paper, it seems crazy, but why not? Because Alabama obviously needs a shot in the arm of some sort for the reasons that you were talking about. And with AJ McCarron leaving, there was obviously uncertainty with who was going to play the position in the first place. Again, I mentioned fifth-year senior Blake Sims converted into a quarterback, right? And then Jake Coker, who was a Florida State transfer, the presumptive favorite to win the job once he transferred to Alabama. A lot of people weren't really giving Blake Sims much of a chance to be the starter, but you kept hearing that he understands the offense. He's a hard worker. He's doing well at practice. He's taking a lot of the first team reps. Jake Coker's taking a little bit of time transitioning into understanding Kiffin's offense and what Alabama is doing. And so ultimately that job goes to Blake Sims. And, I think we didn't really know what to expect or what to think when he ended up starting against West Virginia at the very beginning of the season, which was, a convincing win for Alabama, but not their most dominant neutral site opener for a season. But what did you think of Blake Sims, like when you learned that he got the job and what you saw from him during the first half of the season?
Well, very different type of quarterback for Alabama and in so many different ways. I mean, I think he was a guy who, it would be very reductive to say that Blake Sims was just a dual threat quarterback and that is what was different about him for Alabama. I mean, he certainly had uh incredible athleticism, but the reason why Blake Sims was as successful as he was so quickly at quarterback for Alabama, I think has a lot to do with the fact that Lane Kiffin arrived at the exact right time for a guy with Blake Sims's skill set. I mean, I think you go back and look the real that to my memory, the coming out game, the game where it was really like, okay, uh, Blake Sims at quarterback for Alabama, this is a thing. There is something happening here. Was that Texas A&M game? I remember him absolutely obliterating Texas A&M, and I'm pulling up his stats as we speak here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, he rushes for 54 yards against Texas A&M, passes for 268, 3 touchdowns. A and like it didn't really look like he was struggling much, right? Only threw 27 passes in that game. Only rushed 4 times to get that 54 yards. It just looked so easy for him. I think he had another pretty dominant effort earlier in the season against Florida,
Yeah.
which was kind of a record-setting offensive performance, 445 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, plus another 40 yards on the ground running. So like it was such a good match to have Blake Sims and this guy who understood not just like I think throwing the ball more, not just being more willing to take some chances offensively, but like I think what was unique about Lane coming in is that he was innovative. He was doing things that were I mean, God forbid we use this word under Nick Saban, but it was fun, right? Like it seemed like some of the stuff he was doing, and there's a couple of plays he calls in this game that there's in addition to being effective, it's just kind of like an emotional gut punch to the other team to do some of this stuff.
Too much fun for Saban sometimes. The famous ass chewings that we would see Lane Kiffin getting on the sideline as the offensive coordinator, an offensive coordinator, one of the rare OCs that's on the field coaching. And he always had like a very close relationship with the quarterbacks because he was always working with a first year starter. Lane Kiffin was when he
Mm-hmm.
in his 3 years at Alabama, which I think is one of the most impressive things about his tenure in Tuscaloosa. The fact that his first season, his quarterback is Blake Sims after a quarterback battle. He's a first year starter, a guy who's got to earn a lot of trust and prove that he can play the position. Next year he gets Jake Coker. The next year he gets true freshman Jalen Hurts, and they win 3 straight SEC championships. They go to the playoff all 3 years, and they play and win the national championship one of those seasons too. So it's an unbelievable, inarguably an incredible run by Lane Kiffin there. But it helps when you have playmakers like Amari Cooper on the team. It helps when you have Kenyon Drake wide open 50 yards down the field. You just throw it up there and he's going to go get it, right? And so I think what Lane Kiffin deserves credit for is not necessarily making it easy, but making it easier for those first year quarterbacks, designing these schemes and plays that put the ball in the hands of the playmakers, like the guys that I mentioned. I mean, he obviously had guys like Cooper and Derrick Henry and some of these other guys who were capable of making incredible plays once you got the ball in their hands. So you saw a lot of screens, you saw a lot of crossing routes, and obviously Blake Sims also proved that he could throw the ball downfield. He was one of the best downfield throwers of the Saban era. Incredible deep ball. And so, yes, he could beat you with his legs, but surprisingly, Blake Sims was way more of a passing quarterback, a guy who set passing records that nobody expected him to do, especially following a guy like A.J. McCarron. And yes, that part of that is due to Lane Kiffin and the offense that he installed and had him playing. But Blake Sims deserves a ton of credit for the job that he did as quarterback that year. Nobody expected him to do what he did, and he did it really. He was a really entertaining player to watch.
And I think an underrated part of Blake's legacy too is that, and look, I know this used to be the norm. It used to be common, but Blake was a 4-year Alabama guy. He came out of high school to Alabama. He stayed all 4 years. He waited his turn. And there's classic shots of him as a backup on the bench, like really having a good time watching his teammates. Back in 2012 in Baton Rouge, I remember there's a clip that's very easy to find of Blake Sims pointing to his rings as they beat LSU.
Pointing to other areas of his person,
that's right.
too.
Yes,
reference to a famous faction in the WWE.
That's
but,
right.
Go on.
But yeah, I think one of those guys, we talk about Mark Ingram all the time this way too, like just a Bama guy, just an absolute dyed in the wool Alabama guy. And, I think he wins a lot of affection from the fan base and a lot of fond memories from people because of that.
Yeah, but look who else is on this team. I mentioned Amari Cooper. I mean, you've got TJ Yeldon. You've got Derrick Henry as a freshman backup, right? Jalston Fowler is a guy that we mentioned on this show fairly recently. Wide receivers, along with Cooper, Christian Jones, DeAndrew White, O.J. Howard is a freshman tight end. Darius Stewart is on the roster. And then you talk about some of the defenders, and we'll get into more of who they are. But, Eddie Jackson is a guy who makes a big play in this game. And is somebody that Alabama fans really remember well. Guys like Jonathan Allen, Reggie Ragland,
Jonathan Allen on this team. Yeah, I mean, this I think was coming into a. You talk about Lane Kiffin putting the ball in the hands of playmakers. I think not that Alabama didn't have great offensive talent before this, but I think this also starts to mark a transition into a time when Alabama has started to collect offensive skill players at a level that they had not even during those first 3 championship seasons. And it's almost a little bit of a problem to figure out how do we take the best advantage of all of this offensive skill, right? We're not just going to line up and hammer people with elite running backs and a great offensive line anymore. I think that was a big part of why Kiffin was brought in and was such a good fit right away, is because they needed to figure out how to take advantage of these athletic tight ends, these wide receivers. I mean, Amari Cooper is very clearly the go-to guy on this team, but there's a lot of receivers that are big play guys that are also a huge part of this offense, and that Lane Kiffin has to scheme up some interesting things to get the ball in their hands. And especially against a team like LSU, that is built to stop the sort of more traditional Saban Alabama teams. They are absolutely built to shut down the run, force the quarterback to beat you. And they do the same thing on their side. They are going to run the ball. They're going to keep the ball out of your hands. And so you have to play the sort of Lane Kiffin style of ball to beat an LSU team like this. And that's ultimately why they come out on top in this game.
3-headed monster of Nick Saban, head coach, Lane Kiffin, offensive coordinator, and Kirby Smart as the defensive coordinator. That's unbelievable.
Maybe got to be the best college coaching staff ever, right?
We may never see anything like that again. To me, that's obviously the best combo of those 3 jobs during the Saban era, right? And he had plenty
I
of
mean, got to be
incredible.
during any era, Ben.
Yeah, it's got to be.
I cannot think of a better trio of head coach and coordinators than that in the history of college football.
Well, Matt, let's get into the game here. Let's talk about standout plays that we remember from this game, and it all builds to the end, right? Because this is just one of those classic Alabama LSU slugfests of the late 2000s and early to mid 2000s. Like this was the game, right, where these teams are vying to be the SEC West representative in the SEC championship, and ultimately playing in the national title in many cases. I mean, Alabama was ranked number 5 at this point. They were 8-1, as I mentioned. LSU actually was having somewhat of a down year under Les Miles. They were ranked number 16 coming into the game. They were 7-3, 3-3 in the SEC. But going to Baton Rouge is just a different animal altogether. And it didn't really matter what the record was. LSU had so much talent, and that was such a difficult place to play because of the atmosphere and environment that the fans created. It was at night again. And so Alabama knew that they were going to be up against it regardless, because a lot of those guys on the other side were going to be playing on Sundays in the near future. So, Matt, what is there a play like leading up to again, like the final minute and overtime of the game that sticks out to you more than any other?
Well, I mean, I honestly, as I watched this game, first of all, the thing that jumped out to me is, I mean, this is an unshocking statement to make. Man, Amari Cooper was so good. Amari Cooper was so dang good in college, and they LSU is very clearly scheming to shut him down above all else, and they can't do it. I mean, Amari Cooper continues to be a huge problem for them throughout this game. He scores Alabama's only touchdown in regulation, a 23-yard reception. And I mean, it's a lot of it is him making plays after he touches the ball. There are a lot of screens set up for Cooper. There are a lot of things done off of those screens. A lot of crossing routes, like a thing you see throughout this game is them trying to get Cooper just a little bit of space, and they know if he can get the ball in his hands, he can make something happen after he gets it. And OJ Howard, by the way, who was still a young guy on this team, a similar sort of reliable option for Blake Sims to go to. He is there time after time on third and fourth down when they need something right at the sideline or right over the line of scrimmage, or sorry, the first down marker. But like Blake Sims had these two sort of incredibly reliable safety valves that he could go to time and time again, and in a game where every single play ended up mattering, that's so crucial to have more than one guy like that.
Yeah, for sure. We should also note whenever we do these, like what the broadcast was. This was obviously a CBS primetime
Mhm.
broadcast. This was Vern and Gary, right? This is
That's
Vern
right.
Lundquist calling it, friend of the show, Vern Lundquist and Gary Danielson on color commentary. And they were just, at their peak in terms of like the SEC on CBS. And I remember looking back and going back and watching it now, Gary was just kind of like waiting for the Amari Cooper moment. Like he just knew that at some
Yeah,
point he was just going to break out for something. And then as it's happening, he says, "Here it is." And Amari Cooper breaks like 2 or 3 tackles on his way to scoring, like you said, Alabama's only touchdown in regulation. But he just looked like on that play the best player in college football, like the dude that is going to get open, and you're going to try and bring him down, and he's shifty enough to avoid tackles. I mean, he shed so many during his career, but that was a huge one. Obviously, gave Alabama. I think that tied the game at that point because LSU had scored and gone up 7-0 with
that's right. A really impressive catch by Malachi Dupre
yeah.
for LSU in the first quarter, the first touchdown scored in that game. And it's one of those, man. You and I have both, as you said, Ben. We've seen games in Death Valley when they score something like that, especially early in the game. It gets in your head. That place gets so loud, it gets
Loud.
so aggressive, and I mean, it can rattle you. And I think it may be, and we'll hear from Saban later in the show, but I think Saban agrees that it did maybe rattle Blake Sims a little bit early in this game.
He's human, you know? I
Yeah.
mean, if you're like as somebody watching from the stands, I was rattled, right? Not at this
Oh
game,
yeah.
but you and I were at the 2012 LSU game, which
Yeah.
is another classic, which we may talk about at another time. But yeah, I was rattled. And so, yeah, I can imagine like the players on the field with as much pressure as they had on them, especially that Blake Sims would have in just a little bit later in the game. But look, I mean, Eddie Jackson was a player that I loved at Alabama, and he had an interception towards the end of the first half. It gave Alabama a chance to take the lead in halftime, and Adam Griffith was actually, he played fairly well in terms of converting field goals that Alabama really needed. But, before we get to like the big sequence in the game, the play to me that like nearly defined the game, and we want to focus on like the positives here, and we'll get there. But TJ Yeldon fumbling the ball with a minute 13 to go in the fourth quarter, deep in Alabama's own territory. It looked like the game was over at that point.
Yep.
I mean, all LSU has to do is run a little clock, kick a field goal to win it as time expires, right? And that's it. But Alabama burns their remaining timeouts. The defense holds. They do force the field goal. And so they get the ball back with less than a minute to go. That to me is like one of the biggest moments of the season, let alone the game. The fact that Alabama was able to manage the clock and the defense was able to get the stop that they needed to even give themselves a chance to tie the game and then ultimately win the game, because Blake Sims gets the ball back. The offense gets the ball back deep in their own territory off of a kickoff with 50 seconds to go with no timeouts. And Matt, I don't know if you remember on the CBS broadcast, they cut to an Alabama student, I think it is, talking to a buddy of his in the crowd. And you can see him mouth the words, 50 seconds, no timeouts. I don't know, and everybody is feeling the exact same way at that point. But man, what an incredible sequence.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. So, I mean, you fumble the ball at your own 6.
Yeah.
With a minute
bad.
a minute 13 left. That is as dead. I can remember thinking this watching the game at the time. This is that is the most dead I've ever thought Alabama was, that they ended up winning afterwards. It is an incredibly improbable thing to come back from. And even though it took an offensive drive that we all remember and we all still talk about, equally important to that is the defensive drive that held LSU to a field goal right there. Because if they don't do that, the pressure is even higher. And who knows if Alabama's got that one extra play in them at the end of regulation. But I mean, they come right out. They get a stop on first down at their own 6. Alabama does. They shut down Leonard Fournette, which, by the way, look, also LSU's got 3 absolute hoss running backs at this point. We haven't really talked about them. But I mean, you've got Leonard Fournette, which we would obviously all come to know as a huge deal, but he was still, I believe this was his true freshman season. This is probably the best game he ever had against Alabama.
Easily. 20 carries for 79 yards, right?
Yeah. Then you've also got Terrence McGee, who is this enormous, I guess we would call him a fullback today, but just a very a bulldozer of a guy, who doesn't have huge numbers in this game, but he is devastating when he gets the ball. And then Kenny Hilliard is also a very, very strong running back that LSU has available to them in this game. So these guys have great offensive linemen, they have great running backs, and they only need 6 yards. And Alabama manages to stop them, drive them backwards. Actually, they end up having to kick. They end up having to kick the ball from, I believe, their own 20, or the Alabama 24 is where they end up or the 22 is where they have to kick the field goal from because of penalties and getting backed up. And so, I mean, a huge stand for the Alabama defense when they absolutely need it and leave 50 seconds on the clock for their offense to try to do something.
Yeah, I mean, listen to the names on the Alabama defensive roster, right? Reggie Ragland, Landon Collins, Ashawn Robinson, Eddie Jackson, Jaron Reed. I mean, it's just an unbelievable collection of talent. I mentioned Dalvin Tomlinson, Jonathan Allen, Ryan Anderson's on this team. A little bit on the younger side, I think, at that point in his career. So
some great defensive backs too,
and Kirby Smart's the defensive coordinator.
Yeah,
so it's incredible. So I mean, let's just get to the game saving, season saving drive that was engineered by Lane Kiffin and Blake Sims. I mean, this is like, if you want to call it the drive, there are so many of those during the Saban era and in Alabama football history. But Blake Sims is unbelievable. I mentioned 50 seconds left on the clock, no timeouts. I mean, he has passes to OJ Howard, like you said, a safety valve. Christian Jones has a 22-yard first down reception that is just monster. A big first down scramble by Blake Sims at one point on that drive. And then ultimately, he finds DeAndre White for a first down with a few seconds left. And I mentioned Adam Griffith comes in, he bangs it through to send it to overtime. But I mean, I'm not doing it enough justice there. To me, this was like just as stressful and just difficult to watch as the AJ McCarron, TJ Yeldon drive from just a couple of years prior to that. I mean, this was stressful, Matt.
And it gets down to the wire. I mean, to me, again, this comes down to this is you could not cut it any closer. This is as dead as you could get, and still come back from it. And I mean, look, one thing that's worth pointing out on this drive too, despite having a really good game overall, Amari Cooper has a drop on this drive at a crucial point. So Blake Sims not only has to deliver this drive, but his best guy kind of doesn't come through for him on this drive. And he has a couple of really good scrambles on this drive that buy his receivers some time. He also runs for a first down on 3rd and 4 early in the drive. A huge play it's a 5-yard run in the books, but this is one of those where he's running all across the field. He's running forever to try to make this play happen. To me, Ben, watching this drive over again, the Christian Jones catch, which is a 22-yard pass, diving, getting his arms under the ball at the last second. It was 3rd down. That's the most important play of the drive, I think. And it is an incredible throw and catch at the exact time they need it. And I mean, one of the most important passes, I think, of this entire season for Alabama.
Well, it's also with 13 seconds left in the fourth quarter. Like, again, you talk about the circumstances, the situation, the environment that you're in, and Blake Sims showed just remarkable poise as a leader, as a quarterback, a guy who was capable of performing under high stress. And then, after that, he had another 16-yard pass to DeAndre White with 8 seconds to go to basically set up the Adam Griffith field goal. So that, Matt, that brings us to, because we know that they tie the game, right? In regulation, they then there's a kickoff, a famous kickoff, right? Where I believe Leonard, we should probably note that, where Leonard Fournette fields the kickoff, and then who is he introduced to at that point?
That is a very important play in the history of both Leonard Fournette and Reuben Foster. The classic just slobber knocker kickoff return tackle for a young Reuben Foster that, like, probably today that gets targeting. Probably today Reuben Foster is kicked out of the game for that.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, the nice things we said about Leonard Fournette and his success against Alabama kind of starts and ends there, right? With that play from that point on.
Should have let it go through the end zone.
Yeah, I mean, Reuben Foster sent him into the transfer portal pretty much with that hit. That's what it felt like. But the game goes into overtime, and we get into what we're going to call in this series, Matt, the kill shot, right? Where, for me here, obviously they score on a different play, Matt, but Alabama's first play in overtime, people forget about this. This is like pure sicko stuff from Lane Kiffin.
Yeah.
Right? A pass to a tight end named Brandon Green, who's basically an extra offensive lineman. I bet most fans don't even remember the guy's name pretty much. It goes for 24 yards. This dude is huge. He ends up dragging tacklers down to the 1-yard line. I have no idea how he didn't make it into the end zone with the momentum that he had and the size of him. But later on that drive, Leon Brown, an offensive lineman, he gets a personal foul. It actually pushes Alabama back further when they should have just walked into the end zone at that point. Derrick Henry, he's got a couple of good runs. Leon Brown commits another penalty, this time a false start, before Blake Sims finds DeAndre White in the end zone to take the lead. But do you remember the play that I'm talking about? You've gone back and watched this, Matt. I had no idea that was coming, and the LSU obviously didn't either.
just a super annoying Lane Kiffin play. Like and I mean that in the best way. Just one of those things where he studied the opponent's tendencies. He studied like it's all like the great Lane Kiffin plays are seemed like they were born of him going, "What can I get away with? Like, what's the least legal thing that I can technically get away with?" And he lines up Brandon Green in such a way, you're aligning guys differently on the line of scrimmage so that it looks like he's playing offensive tackle, and in fact, he's eligible as a receiver. And he streaks down the field, wide open, enormous dude who's just, his momentum carries him the rest of the way. But like that's the kind of stuff we talk about with Lane that you couldn't have possibly seen coming. It's an unconservative call at a time in the game where your tendency is probably to be conservative and safe and just not blow it, right? But earlier in the game too, there was something that jumped out to me about um, from Lane Kiffin's play calling when things are tough going and Blake Sims is having a hard time getting anything going offensively. They sort of fake a screen to Amari Cooper, and they have DeAndrew White fire off down the field, and it's a touchdown basically if Blake Sims doesn't overthrow DeAndrew White. He's wide open. It was a super clever, almost trick play to run at a tough time deep in your own half of the field. And I think like that's the mentality from Lane Kiffin. He's not scared to let something crazy rip when there's a lot on the line. And honestly, that's kind of when we talk about kill shots in a game, that's where they come from. Like it's the ability to be aggressive when everything else in a normal person's brain would be saying play it safe right now.
Yeah, I mean, just a great moment in the Kiffin era. Like I said, sicko stuff from him. But
Yeah.
you know, Bama takes the lead, and DeAndrew White, he's a guy that we rarely ever talk about anymore, but he was reliable. He was a guy who was capable. He was a deep threat, capable of making big plays for Alabama. Did on many occasions. He's a guy that I always really enjoyed watching, and then he makes the big play and is a hero along with Blake Sims and the others in the game. But LSU gets the ball and it's just four and done, right? Like they throw four straight incompletions. The refs are letting him play. I think the head referee in this game is Tom Ritter, as I recall, and there's some physical activity in the end zone towards the end of this game. I thought there was going to be a pass interference call at one point, but they no flags on the field, four straight incompletions. Alabama wins.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting this LSU era, Ben, because I think I forget sometimes about Alabama's opponents at least in terms of some of the specifics, but like LSU under Les Miles, uh, it's such a perplexing thing because they had so much talent. They were so good at so many areas. They never really had a great quarterback under Les Miles. And this is such a good example of that, right? Like if I asked you who the quarterback was before we rewatched this game, would you have even been able
No,
to
no
tell me
way.
that Anthony Jennings was a guy?
No, a guy, let alone their starting quarterback. No, probably not. Like I probably
Just
would have
not
guessed
yeah,
Zach Mettenberger or somebody. I don't know.
they just never had an elite guy at quarterback. And I guess the thinking is somewhat, I mean, some of it could be guys who were elite prospects and just didn't turn out right. Some of it though, I think is it's about what you prioritized in your recruiting. And like I said, LSU was sort of building themselves to be the Alabama killer in this period. They wanted to be physical, they wanted to be able to go toe to toe with with something like the 2011-2012 Alabama teams and say you're not going to outlast us in the fourth quarter. We're going to be more physical than you. We're going to hammer at you, and we're going to play really tough, stingy, brutal defense on you. And I think as we got to the end of the Les Miles era at LSU, it started to show that actually was not the right approach to beat Alabama anymore, especially once Lane Kiffin was running the offense.
No, and I mean, it goes to show you how dominant and great this era was for Alabama, because these were some great LSU teams that they faced. This was probably not among their best, even though it was just riddled with talent. I mean, you were talking about the running back depth earlier. I mean, that was everywhere on the field. I mean, LSU was always going to just have a team chock full of talent, but Alabama LSU was just a game that everybody circled on their calendars beyond the fan bases, beyond these teams. Game day was going to come visit these games. They were going to be, CBS was going to readjust their programming so that they could do a primetime game for this rivalry. And this really emerged, even more so than the Iron Bowl, even more so than Alabama Tennessee, as the college football rivalry for a stretch when college football was really peaking as a product in a lot of ways, and everybody tuned in for it, and it usually delivered. But they beat them in 2010. They beat them in 2011, obviously in the regular season, the game of the century. But Alabama just took control after that, took control of this rivalry, and sort of showed them who was boss, even though they were as physical of games as you would ever watch. And it was just like the epitome of SEC football at its highest level. So loved watching it. Matt, we see what happened there. Alabama wins on those 4 straight incompletions. They walk out of Death Valley, the winners again for a second straight trip. Now we get into this discussion of MVP. Who won the game, right? Who's the individual that we walk away from this game remembering most as synonymous with the experience, the moment, the success that Alabama had? Who do you look towards? Who are some of your candidates for who won this game for Alabama?
He didn't have his best game, but he had his best moment probably of his career at Alabama. So to me, I want to give MVP to Blake Sims just because, especially for a quarterback, I think being able to come through in a moment like this, it's heavily weighted in your legacy as a quarterback. I think when we talk about Bryce Young's career, so much of what we remember about him, I think, comes from that Iron Bowl game winning or game tying to send it to overtime, that drive, because it's not just about executing on every single play, even though I'm sure that's what Nick Saban would say. It is, I think, about coming through when the pressure is greatest and you are the person who has to get it done. The clock is down to nothing. We can't depend on the running backs anymore. You have to be the guy to get it done. And Blake Sims came through huge in the most high pressure moment in his career. So I mean, to me, I got to give it to Blake for this one.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a player that we pick as the MVP or the person who won the game, right? Like it could be Nick Saban and the decision making on his part, or like even Lane Kiffin and the plays that he was calling, Kirby Smart for throwing all the different looks and packages at LSU during the game, or it could even be Verner Gary for that matter, for like what we remember most about it. But I'm with you. I think you got to go Blake Sims. I mean, it's not like you said, it's not his best passing game. He's 20 of 45, but he's got the 2 touchdowns, including a game winner. He has some really important scrambles, especially on that last minute drive, and just makes huge throws. So Blake Sims, just unforgettable. Arguably, like you said, his best game of his Alabama
It's
career.
it's either this one or it's either this one or the Iron Bowl, I think, for
Yeah.
Blake Sims.
Yeah, an incredible game too, and and we should talk about that soon. But you could make the argument for Amari Cooper, right? He's probably the best player on the field. He has 8 catches. He's got 86 yards, a touchdown. Jaron Reed, big burly defensive lineman, guy had 15 tackles in this game, which is
That's
not
huge.
pretty unusual for a defensive tackle. J.K. Scott punted the ball 9 times for 437 yards, 9 times, okay, and he had an
Yes.
average of 48.6 yards as a punter. Just a monster game for
Yeah,
him. But
Anthony Jennings was in absolute hell in this game. He was not having a good time. And you go and look at his final stats. I think says a lot about the Alabama defense. 8 of 26 for 76 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And despite that really good touchdown pass that he has, just a really tough day for the LSU offense. They have a hard time getting just about anything done other than pounding the ball up the middle with Leonard Fournette and those other running backs. But I mean, a huge day for that Alabama. I think the one that doesn't show up on the scorecard, that Alabama secondary, that just totally denies this LSU passing game in any way. They only have 8 receptions in this game for
Unbelievable.
76 yards through the air. They cannot get the ball to move through the air at all in this game. And I mean, those Alabama defensive backs, this is about as good as it got for that Alabama secondary. I mean, there were some great groups in that era, but this was Alabama's pass defense at its peak, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Cyrus Jones, Landon Collins, Nick Perry late in his career.
Mm-hmm.
Geno Smith was a big time recruit for Nick Saban, and so yeah, you're talking about like blue chippers playing blue chip football. So and LSU wasn't very shabby on the other side of the ball either, with a guy like Quan Alexander leading the way with 10 tackles. I mean, it's just one of the most. Jamal Adams was playing in this game, like just one of the most physical games you'll ever watch. These like early 2010s, mid 2010s Alabama LSU games.
Every once in a while you'll see those graphics come up where they show that there would be some moment in one of these sort of early 2010s Alabama LSU games, and literally every single person on the field ended up playing in the NFL. And it was just it's amazing that as much talent as there was on both sides of the ball, that Alabama absolutely dominated this rivalry in the 2010s. I mean, 20 LSU wins the regular season game in 2011, and they don't win another one until 2019.
Wild, absolutely wild. Well, it's time for what Saban said, Matt. So are we going to hear from Nick Saban and what he said after the game?
Yeah, we've got his post-game press conference. We're going to try to do this with as many of these games as we can. Obviously, the further back you go, the harder it is to track this stuff down. But thankfully, the AL.com team has been recording these for a very long time, going back to the days where we just had, 8mm handy cams that we would do this stuff on. But yeah, here's Saban's sort of opening statement after this game from Tiger Stadium.
The way our guys finished the game, the resiliency they showed in the game, the adversity they had to overcome in the game, which we knew we would have to playing here. It's always this way here. But when the defense went out and they got the fumble, I said, guys, we got to hold them to a field goal. We're going to time out. This is where you show you know how to win. You got to stop them right here. And when the offense went out there with 50 seconds to go in a game, or 55 or whatever it was to go 2 minutes, I said, this is where you show if you know how to win. You got to go kick a field goal. Got no timeouts. And the players did a great job in both those circumstances, and it continued in overtime. Really did a great job in overtime, even though we get 2 penalties inside the 2-yard line. So we made it a little more difficult than we needed it to be. But you got to be proud of the players, the way they competed, the resiliency that they showed, how they finished the game. Now, if you want.
Well, we'll leave it there, but yeah, I love that he's already. We run the first minute of that post game speech here. He's already talking about penalties. He's already complaining about stuff they did wrong late in the game. Just a pretty classic Saban reaction to a game like that. And I will say this too: if you've been I think you have been to a post game at Tiger Stadium. Not that Alabama's facilities are super accommodating either for visiting teams. They really truly put you in a utility closet at LSU if you're the visiting team.
Yeah, I've actually never been worked a game. I've only watched a game from the stands in Tiger Stadium. But yeah, I have been in opposing press conference rooms, and even in Bryant Denny Stadium, right? Like, I mean, it's a smaller room. It's the photo room where like all the photographers are like setting up their gear and like editing their picks. And then as you're editing your picks behind you, you just hear like, another head coach start talking. You're just like, oh yeah, I forgot I'm in the press conference room right here. And it's a small, intimate setting. so to speak. But yeah, Nick Saban, I mean, he said it all. He kind of said a lot of what we said, right? Like just he speaks about the resiliency. He loves to see like how his players respond to adversity. It doesn't get more adverse than what they saw in Baton Rouge that night. But that was really cool where he talked about like, I told the defense, like, we're going to use all of our timeouts. You just got to get a stop. You've got to force a field goal. And this is where you prove that like you're a competitor, you know how to win. And the
And you
same
make
was
the
obviously
same,
true.
yeah, you make the same speech to the offense
Yeah.
too. That's pretty cool.
And they responded.
And both sides of the ball come through. Like you have to do you absolutely got to get it done here. You got to do that speech twice in a row, and it works both times.
Yeah, but like you just walked out of there with a critical win in hostile environment where he said it's always like it here, like it's always like it like that at this place, and they responded like you had to coach hard at the end of this game. Like you're talking about situational football, and you've got to coach hard, deliver that message, and both units responded and did exactly what he asked of them. And then in the press conference, he's still just like, we had those penalties though, like, so it's just like, man, you did exactly what you had to do. And so did they. And you still got some coaching to do, even when you walk out of there with a win.
And I've pulled up another clip from this too. He had I thought he had some cool things to say about Blake Sims' performance here.
And then we threw a ball down the field and got it intercepted. But, I was really proud of Blake because he didn't have one of his better games. And it was tough. They were playing a lot of man-to-man, a lot of close coverage. We threw a lot of balls in the first half trying to beat him over the top and never really did. But he hung in there. And, he made some great plays when we had to in 2 minutes at the end of the game. And really proud of him for hanging in there. You got to have a lot of resiliency when you play, in our league. I mean, these are good teams that we play. I'm really, really proud of the way he hung in there today because things weren't going well for him. And in the past, Blake would have gotten frustrated, but he showed a lot of resiliency today and hung in there and made the plays when he needed to make them and did a great job in that 2-minute drive. Made a great throw for the touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think Saban praising a quarterback is always a big deal. But particularly, I mean, I think you can tell like this one meant a lot in part because this is one that should have gotten away and it didn't,
Yeah, well, that's what you like. I think a lot of fans, LSU fans, too, considering the nature of and the closeness of a lot of the games between them during this period. That's why they would say like Alabama is not dead until they are dead, right? Like until like you've got to do everything, and you've got to tie a chain around them, give them a cinder block, and drop them in the bottom of the lake, like you would Jason in the Friday the 13th movies, and then they're still going to come back at some point. There's still going to be sequels, right, where he's back on the loose. But he also sounded like a guy who'd been screaming a lot. Like his voice is a little hoarse in that press conference, and he had a lot to scream about, but it obviously got through to them. This was a highly coachable bunch who responded to what he and those amazing coaches that we had mentioned earlier were doing. But the players just deserve so much credit, and we've singled out Blake Sims. But man, what an awesome team! And I guess we can get into the takeaways here, Matt. This is the last thing we'll do with this game, but this saved Alabama's season in a lot of ways. I mean, it looked like it was over, like I said, when TJ Yeldon fumbled the ball, and you could really never count Alabama out, like I just said a few seconds ago. But I mean, it looked like the season was over because they had already lost that game to Ole Miss, and it was basically a repeat of 2012 when you and I were inside Tiger Stadium for that. But it gives the team momentum as likely contenders to make the inaugural college football playoff that year. And they would obviously go on to win the Iron Bowl, and they would go on to dominate Missouri in the SEC championship, and they would make the college football playoff as the number 1 seed, I believe, that year.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Ben, putting this in perspective, a good comparison to me for this 2014 team ends up being the 2008 Alabama team for me, because whether we knew it at the time or not, I think it ends up being a transitional period for Alabama. I think it is a time where look, I think Alabama fans have a tendency to look at seasons where they don't win a national title and say that was a waste. That was a waste of a year. But it's sometimes you have to learn how to win a different way than you've known before. I think 2008 for Alabama was learning how to become an elite program. And I think for 2014, it was learning how to become a different kind of elite football team. It was learning how to become a high-powered offense and learning what that means as a defense that you're going to have to play probably more snaps than you used to play before, and learning that there's going to be more a heavier rotation of wide receivers, learning that our running back room is going to probably be built differently than it used to be. Just all of these things of transitioning into a new kind of football as the game itself was evolving. And I think that 2014 was a success in as much as it turned Alabama into a different kind of team that would then go on to have an incredible run of back to back to back to back appearances in the college football playoff, but also they were essentially in the national championship game every year after this until 2019, Ben. And they could have been in it that year too, if not for some, some key injuries. But this season, I think, was important for Alabama, and I think it showed Alabama as a program that they could do things differently and still be successful at it.
Yeah, it's crazy how you say 2008 to 2014, and it just feels like there wasn't a lot of time between those teams, but you're talking about 6 years, 6 seasons.
You're talking about
difference.
3 national championships.
That's nuts, man. It's like, I'm watching, if I go back and watch like Pulp Fiction, a movie from like 1994, and I think, wait, it was only 6 years before this that Bruce Willis was in Die Hard, the first Die Hard, and it's just like blows your mind because so much can happen between so much can happen in 6 years, so that was obviously true for Alabama football too. Like you said, they were like already a dynasty at that point, and little did Alabama fans know that they were only halfway through in terms of how many national championships Nick Saban would win.
And I think in a lot of ways, Alabama under Saban is almost 2 separate dynasties, right? And I think that first half is one of them. And I think that 2014 season and bringing in Lane Kiffin, it was sort of like the beginning of a second dynasty that would happen. And arguably the second one was more powerful and more difficult to stop than the first one was. And they learned along the way how to do it. I think, look, they were a very good team, but they had some flaws, and, teams like LSU almost took advantage of it. They didn't quite. And you run into a buzzsaw of an Ohio State team at the end of the season that kind of derailed things. But I think that this team picked up a lot along the way. I think games like this would teach some of those younger players what it looks like to be a dominant team in an era where people play offense very differently.
Yeah, man, I think we all learned something along the way, didn't we? Like, especially looking back at this game. And gosh, it's a good thing we stop here because I don't want to even get into what happened in that semifinal game against Ohio State when Alabama goes up 20-7 early in the first half, and then things just get away from them. But congrats to the Buckeyes on that one. I think Alabama just kind of ran out of gas there, and like you said, ran into a buzzsaw. So worthy opponent, worthy champion. All right, Matt. Unless you have anything else, I think that's it for this first edition of how we're counting down the 15 best games of the 21st century in Alabama football history.
Yeah, fun stuff. I liked rewatching this one. This was a fun one to go through. I'm excited to get through the rest of them, Ben.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So be sure to tune in to number 14 as we go through this countdown. We're not going to tell you what they are. You got to tune in to find out what we consider the 15 best games of this run. So thank you, and thank you, Matt. Let's do it again soon. He's Matt Scalisi, Beat Everyone producer. You can find Beat Everyone wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, on YouTube, on Spotify, anywhere. And I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. We'll see you next time for number 14.